Jalen stood outside the club, ready to walk away. But then he turned back, full of fury. He wasn't seeking redemption. He was ready to tear their world apart. Just as they were about to push him away again, something happened that froze everything. But what came next will change everything. Let's start from the beginning. It was a night like any other at Vanguard, the kind of place where money talks louder than anything else. The velvet ropes kept out the riffraff, and the champagne flowed freely for those who belonged. Mike Rogers, the bouncer, a burly man in his 40s, didn't expect anything out of the ordinary tonight. He dealt with drunken fights and unruly guests, but nothing that would make him break a sweat. That was until Jalen Mitchell walked in. The moment Jalen approached, the air in the room seemed to shift. Mike took one look at him, his sharp suit, his confident stride, and without hesitation, made his move. "You need to leave," Mike said, his voice cold and dismissive. No greeting, no explanation, just an order. Jalen's brow furrowed. He didn't understand. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice calm, controlled. But Mike wasn't interested in reasoning. "Dress code violation," he muttered, though it was obvious to anyone that Jalen's tailored suit was flawless, an outfit worth more than most people's monthly rent. The other patrons glanced over, sensing the tension. Some exchanged uneasy looks, others simply watched, unwilling to get involved. Jalen's eyes darted around the room, meeting theirs, but no one stepped in. They just stared in silence, some clearly uncomfortable, others too eager to preserve their own spot in this exclusive world. Mike's eyes locked onto Jalen's, the unsaid words hanging in the air between them. "You don't belong here." The injustice was palpable, the racism so blatant, it cut through the luxury and the excess like a knife. It wasn't about the suit. It was about something deeper. Jalen didn't argue. He didn't need to. His dignity was intact, even as Mike's hands gripped his arm and escorted him out. As he stepped outside, the weight of it all pressed down on him. The injustice, the unspoken rules that excluded him, the constant reminder that some people would never see him as an equal. He walked away, fists clenched. Anger and frustration burned inside him. How many times had he faced this before? How many times would it happen again? Jalen stood on the sidewalk outside Vanguard, the club's dazzling lights still flickering behind him. His breath came in shallow bursts, the sting of humiliation biting at his pride. He stared at the shimmering neon, disbelief thick in his chest. How could this happen? His mind raced through every interaction, every glance, every word spoken in that sterile, velvet-roped world. It didn't make sense. His fist clenched, the tension in his hand mirroring the anger coiling in his gut. For a moment, he considered going back inside, demanding an explanation, confronting the injustice head-on. But he knew that would get him nowhere. They had made it clear. He wasn't welcome. Not here, not now. The buzzing of his phone broke his thoughts. It was Marcus, his best friend, the one who always knew how to ground him. He answered quickly. "Yo, what happened?" Marcus's voice was full of concern, a sharp contrast to the anger Jalen felt. Jalen sighed, his eyes still fixed on the club, the place he had hoped would be a night of relaxation and escape. "You know the drill. They kicked me out for no reason." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Marcus spoke. "That's messed up, but don't let them win, man. You're better than this." Jalen felt the weight of his words, but it didn't quite ease the fire burning inside him. He leaned back against the cold brick wall, staring up at the stars, each one a reminder of the world's vast indifference. The anger was still there, gnawing at him, but underneath it, something else simmered. Resolve. He wasn't going to let this moment break him. But as he stood there, a deeper sense of empathy washed over him. Not for himself, but for all the others who had faced the same, or worse, and never had a voice. The ones who accepted the silence. The ones who didn't fight back. The ones who kept their heads down and stayed out of sight. Jalen knew, deep down, that this moment wasn't about his own humiliation. It was about something bigger, something that needed to be changed. The city buzzed with the new kind of energy the next morning. News of the man kicked out for no reason at Vanguard spread like wildfire, igniting a wave of outrage across social media. Hashtags, viral posts, and impassioned comments flooded timelines, and soon the outrage reached the ears of activists, influencers, and everyday people alike. The club's reputation for exclusivity had always kept it safe from scrutiny, but now, for the first time, the silence was being shattered. It was time for a reckoning. Jalen paced his apartment, the anger from the night before still simmering under his skin. His phone buzzed with messages, but it was Marcus's call that he answered. "I'm going back tonight," Jalen said without hesitation, his voice cold with determination. "I'm going to show them that they can't get away with this." Marcus's voice was cautious, weighed down with concern. "Are you sure, man? That place is full of power. You're not just up against the bouncers. You'll be taking on the whole system." Jalen's eyes narrowed. "I don't care. They can either apologize or we make them pay." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was ready to fight back, not for himself, but for everyone who'd been silenced by the same forces. That night, he prepared himself for what was ahead. He wasn't walking in as a man seeking revenge. He was stepping into the lion's den as a symbol of resistance. When Jalen arrived at the club, it was as if the air around him thickened. The usual doormen stood by the velvet ropes, their eyes narrowing as they recognized him. The tension in the air was palpable, but Jalen didn't flinch. His heart beat steady, his resolve unwavering. As he approached the entrance, the bouncers stiffened, waiting for him to back down. He didn't. "Not this time," he said, his voice cold with defiance, cutting through the air like a blade. "You don't get to treat me like that." The bouncers hesitated. For a split second, they were unsure. Jalen stood there, his calm fury impossible to ignore. This wasn't just about one man or one night. This was bigger. It was for the others, the countless others who had been turned away, disrespected, silenced. And Jalen was ready to make sure their stories were heard. Jalen didn't just want an apology. He wanted justice. The next day, he filed a lawsuit against Vanguard, accusing them of racial discrimination. The media, always hungry for a story, latched onto it instantly. Headlines flashed across screens, news outlets devoured the details, and soon, the story went viral. The city's elite, the very people who had once turned a blind eye to the club's practices, began to speak out. It was no longer just about one man's experience. It was about something bigger. The once untouchable club, shielded by its reputation and wealth, found itself cornered. The pressure from the public was overwhelming. Activists, influencers, and even some of the city's most powerful figures rallied behind Jalen, condemning the club's blatant discrimination. The walls that had once kept the club's secrets safe were crumbling. The club could no longer ignore the outrage. When the case finally reached court, the pressure proved too much. Instead of facing a prolonged legal battle, the club chose to settle. They issued a public apology, not just to Jalen, but to everyone they had ever excluded unjustly. It wasn't enough to save their image, but it was a step toward accountability. The bouncers who had humiliated Jalen were fired, and the club's security protocols were overhauled, ensuring that this kind of behavior would never happen again. Jalen had won. But the victory wasn't just his. It belonged to every person who had ever been turned away, ignored, or silenced because of their race. His name became synonymous with resilience, with standing up when the odds were stacked against you. He had taken on the system and come out on top. Months later, when Jalen walked into Vanguard again, the atmosphere had changed. The doormen, once so eager to exclude him, now recognized him with a different kind of look. Respect. He wasn't just a man who had been wronged anymore. He was a force, a symbol of justice. Standing in front of the club that had once humiliated him, Jalen couldn't help but smile. He had done the unthinkable, turned the tables on those who had tried to dismiss him. And now, in their eyes, he was untouchable.